Hello, I have four examples of that relate to z-index. So I've just grouped them into four examples. The first example is stacking of elements in the normal flow. The second example, stacking of position elements without z-index. Stacking of elements, the third one was position absolute and z-index. And the fourth one, elements with z-index establish their own stacking context. Just before we go into the index, I just wanted to share a couple of articles that blog posts that I came across on the web. The first one is by Van Seo Design, and it's pretty old, but it's a very good explanation, in my opinion. Very good explanation as a starting point of z-index. I will post both links under my video. And the second one is, which is by Philip Wanton. It's called What No One Told You About z-index. It's a bit more complicated. It's not as straightforward as the first one, but also a good introduction with the further description and like on a more deeper level of z-index. So these two articles, and I will post links to both of them under my video. So let's take a look at the first example here. What we have here is just what happens. So it makes sense to look into what happens with elements without any z-index or without any positioning. And here we have a simple example of so basically we have just h1, then we have p, and then 3 divs. So and CSS pretty straightforward. Just main, I gave it a border, some padding, and then 3 boxes below. So each box has a width, height, and okay, I put that index here, but let me just remove this. Save. Okay, and let's open it with live server. See what happens here. Okay, so what happens in this case is the rule says that the root HTML element forms the root default stacking context. So what it means is that all elements which are under HTML, which is root, like say any web page, it forms like the root element, it forms the stacking context by itself already by just being present there, the HTML element. And it says here the descendant non-position elements in the normal flow are stacked in order of their appearance in HTML. So it's pretty straightforward, and so in this case what we see here is this is the order of appearance in HTML, exactly as the rule says. We have h1, then we have p, and then we have 3 boxes, 1, 2, 3. So we look in the markup. Yes, we have h1, we have p, and we have 3 boxes, 1, 2, 3. Okay, this is pretty straightforward. So this is default stacking. It's called default stacking in the normal flow. So close this one. Let's look at the second one. Second example I have is stacking of absolutely positioned elements without z-index. So what happens there? So I have the example of absolutely positioned elements, but my understanding it can be any elements that position other than static. So let's take a look at the markup again. h1, p, and then followed by 3 divs, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so let's see what the rule says and see how it works. Okay, so stacking of absolutely positioned elements without z-index. So the rule says absolutely positioned elements are displayed in front of any non-position elements. So let's look here what we have. Box 1 no position, box 2 also no position, box 3 I gave it position absolute with, I just gave it for the sake of example just z index 1 just to see if it would be working with just z index 1. And we see even though in the markup it goes box 1, box 2, box 3, because we gave z index 1 to position absolute and position absolute to box 3, so what we see happening is box 3 is on top of those two, so it sits on top. So let's change this. So like let's just give it's on top. Okay, let's just give that index to box 1. And what also important to know that index it's only it's only working with position elements. It won't work if there is no position given on the element. Okay, so we just move position absolute to box 1 and we just move the same just to box 1. Okay, so save it. Box 1 is a green box. Here you go. We have box 1 on top of those two boxes. So this is pretty much the also quite straightforward behavior. So as the rule says, absolutely positioned elements are displayed in front of any non-position elements. This is exactly what we have. Non-position and position, so it's pretty straightforward. I'm gonna close this one, and the next one, what's example number 2? Example number 3. Okay, it's a stacking of elements with position absolute and z index. So what happens here? So let's see what we have. Say we have same markup. We have h1, two paragraphs, and then followed by 3 divs, box 1, box 2, box 3. So we have in the CSS. So all 3 boxes are given by a given position absolute with z indexes. The only difference is that box 1 given z index 5, and then box 2 given z index 10, and then box 3 given z index 17. So let's see what the rule says. Open with live server. Okay. So example 3 is taken events with position absolute and z index. As I mentioned before, that index only works on position elements, and elements with higher z index values are in front of elements with lower z index values. So let's see here. This is also pretty straightforward. So box 3 is a yellow box, background yellow. It has the highest z index of 17, and we see yellow boxes actually on top of those two. Box 2 I just made it a little transparent just for the sake of the example, and box 1 is there. So, and yes, the stacking here, for those who don't know, the stacking is done like basically in z index context. There is 3 axes. The first axis from left to right, then from top to bottom, and then the third one is from the viewer to further to the viewport. So it's a distance, it's like a third. But you can Google it, just those three, just Google 3-axis and Z index, and it will show you those 3-axis. So yeah, so in this case, box 3 is in front because it has the highest Z index. If we change, just to the example, so we change the Z index of box 3, so let's change it to 10, and this one we change to 17. Save it. Okay, now you see box 2 is on top of those two because now this box has the highest Z index out of this stack. So this is pretty straightforward too. So gonna close this one. Oh yeah, let me check. Okay, yes, what I wanted to note here, yeah, also that as I mentioned, Z index only works on position elements whose position is other than static, and in this example this position absolute, and 3-axis which I use to represent the purpose of the axis, like this one, the x axis is left to right, as I mentioned before, y-axis is top to bottom, and then z-axis is front to back, saying that front is a viewer, the person who views monitor, and the imaginary axis goes from the viewer to the back, which means it goes to the viewport. And this is this third axis, which goes like here. This is called the z-index axis. It's a z-axis. Okay, so as I mentioned before, any element with a z-index in front of any element without z-index, and elements with higher z-index values are in front of elements with lower z-index. That's pretty much it about this example. Okay, I'm gonna close this third one, and we go into the fourth one. Let me close this. The fourth example is what happens with the element who has a z-index. So the rule says that the elements with z-index establish their own stacking context, meaning that the elements with z-index value other than auto establish their own stacking context for their descendants. And this one is a bit not as straightforward as the previous one, but also more interesting. So let's take a look what's happening here. Okay, so we have our HTML, which is H1, P, and then we have 3 boxes. So div1, div2, div3, so 3 boxes. Okay. Let's see. Okay, the CSS, we have box 1, all of 3 boxes, 1, 2, 3. They have position absolute and Z index given to them. So box 1 has position absolute Z index 15, box 2 position absolute Z index 5, and box 3 position absolute with Z index 2. So the box 1, it should be on top of those 2 boxes because it has the highest Z index. Also, what's happening here is because this example targets the box 2 in terms of like showing what's happening with the descendants. Box 2, as you see, I have 2 rules. Box 2, first of all, let's go to box 2. Box 2, it has 2 spans. I put 2 spans, span 1, span 2, and I target those spans, I give those spans also because those spans are children of box 2. So box 2 forming or establishing the position like a Z index context, positioning stacking sorry, it's called box 2 because it has its own Z index, establishing a stacking context for its two children span elements. Okay, so the first I target with the child selector. The first span is targeted with the child selector, and the second span is targeted with the adjacent siblings selector. So these two, the first span is given also the absolute position, and it's given its own Z index 20. The second span also given the position absolute and Z index 15. But what's happening here is this position absolute Z index 20 and this position absolute is Z index 20. It makes them positioned in the stacking context relative not to the document, the whole document itself, but only to box 2. It's relative to position absolute Z index 5, these two, because those are two children of box 2 of this div. So let's see what happens. Here you go. So we have our first box, green box, with Z index 15. Then we have the second box where this is happening with those two Z indexes with Z index 5, and then we have the yellow box with Z index 2. So we see is normal behavior here. Because this is 15, it's on top of all the rest because this is the highest Z index. This 5, it's on top of 2, but it's below, like at the back of 15. And then 2, that's the lowest index, it's behind Z index 5. So as I mentioned, these two, they are relative to this box, to this Z index. And what's interesting to note is because, so if we change Z index 15 like this, just to note, you see, again, because this is relative to this, you see this 20 and 15, this is the higher Z index. So you can see here, and the Z index 15, it's actually below. I specifically position it a little bit below of Z index 20, so you can see that Z index 20 is on top of this, and this is happening because it has higher Z index and it's on top of this. Okay, so but what's interesting here is that, say, because these two are linked to Z index 5, so let's do a little experiment. We change Z index 5, say, to Z index 20. So we make it the higher Z index than rest two boxes. Let's see what's happening. You see, it just proves that, you see, the whole thing, like this box, these three boxes, they all moved on top of those two boxes, which proves the rules that they are linked to this, and this is like the Z index 5 However, they have their own like sub indexes or whatever you call it, that this and those indexes. So yeah, so those are linked to this, so it moves together like in front. What's interesting about this is if we change z index 15, say to negative value, let's actually do it. I'm gonna change z index 15 to minus 15, like make it negative, and the behavior that we would be expecting is that this whole thing with the background z index 15 should go behind z index 5, behind, basically should go behind, becomes invisible because it will go behind this purple box. So let's try changing it to minus 15. Okay, 15. Save it. Oops. What's happening here? It didn't go behind the purple box. So why this is happening? But it did go, as you can see, it did go behind the text, but it didn't go behind the purple box, like the background itself. So this is happening, and this is interesting behavior. So this is happening because the rule says that as per stacking rules, the element can never be stacked below the background of its stacking context. So it can never go below the background or behind the background of its stacking context. So the stacking context of for z index 15 is this purple box, so it will never go behind that purple box. Okay, this is pretty much everything that I wanted to share today, and as always, thank you for watching, guys, and I will post those two links below the video. Thank you.